Starting with Congressman G.T. Thompson. G.T., give a wave to everybody. There's G.T. Of course, we've got his great colleague, Dan Muser. Dan, where you at? We've got State Senator Chris Dush. Chris, where are you? Thank you, Chris. God bless you, man. We've got County Commissioners Scott Metzger and Mark Sortman. Scott, Mark, where are you? Thank you, gentlemen. Now, I'm very happy to be joined, of course, by these incredible local leaders. I'm also thrilled to have my wife and son are here with us today. And you guys saw Usha. But I got to admit, I'm a little frustrated, I have to say, with my wife, because instead of staying here and listening to my speech, she's back there playing laser tag with my 7-year-old. I rarely get jealous. But, man, they're having a good time. You know, there's like a big bounce-like house. Have you all ever been here? This place is incredible. That's what I was doing for about 10 minutes. And then, you know, we came out here, decided to talk to everybody, and I realized that if Joe Biden had been out there, then maybe he would have pulled out a little bit earlier, right, from that race. I don't think that bounce house was made for Joe Biden. Well, my friends, let's talk a little bit about this race and a little bit about where we are. And I don't know if you all saw, but you know, there's a big night for Kamala Harris tonight because she's got probably the hardest interview that she's ever done. She is doing an interview with Fox News Channel's Brett Baier. Now, of course, it is major news because Kamala Harris doesn't really do interviews at all, and if she does do interviews, they are softball interviews. Have you seen some of Kamala Harris's interviews? I wouldn't recommend it. You lose about 20 IQ points if you watch Kamala Harris give an answer to a question about public policy. But, you know, I was watching her about 10 days ago. She was doing an interview with The View, and that's, you know, Kamala Harris on The View, my friends, that is something to really avoid unless you absolutely have to watch it. But I'm running for vice president. That's what I'm doing. I'm watching these things so that you don't have to. So you can come here and hang out with me, and I'll tell you what's going on. But, you know, the media talks about how Kamala Harris only does softball interviews, and I was watching Kamala Harris give some interview responses to these hosts at The View, and it occurred to me, you know, the problem with softball interviews, my friends, is that you still have to be able to hit a softball. And unfortunately, our illustrious vice president, every time that she speaks, I think that Donald Trump and I gain about 100,000 votes. And yeah, we can all laugh about it, we can all talk about it, but it's actually, the truth behind it is a little bit frightening. Because we have a person running for president of the United States who doesn't care enough about the details of the governance of this country to answer basic questions, even when those answers are very easy. Now let's talk just a little bit about Kamala Harris. The theme of her campaign is that she has never seen, has never been in the room with, and doesn't even know the name of the current president of the United States. Even though she's his vice president, and even though she cast the deciding vote on trillions of dollars of his spending, even though he bragged about her being in the room when all decisions were made, Kamala Harris is going around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the whole country saying, I don't know who this guy is, and I had nothing to do with it. Well, Kamala, we have the record and we have the tape. And unfortunately, some of the tape we have is in your own words. And you know, when she did this View interview, they said, well, Kamala Harris, what is one thing that you would have done differently than Joe Biden over the last 3.5 years? And you know what she said? Nothing comes to mind. That is, I think, the official tagline of the Kamala Harris campaign for president. Nothing comes to mind, right? That. Now, there's something else that happened this week, and of course our friends in the media like to pretend that it hasn't happened, but I don't know if you saw the news that apparently Kamala Harris wrote this book called Smart on Crime about 15, 20 years ago. That's not the joke, actually. But Kamala Harris wrote this book, and it turns out she plagiarized whole sections of the book. I mean, 30 years ago, 30 years ago, that's the kind of scandal that would have ended a presidential campaign, and now our entire media just kind of collectively sighs and says, oh, it's no big deal that she passed off somebody else's work as her own. Well, we in this room, because we believe in integrity and we believe in honesty, we believe it is a big deal that the President of the United States lies instead of telling the truth, and we're not going to let her forget about it. And it's not just what she copied, but it's where she copied it from. You know, I wrote a book in 2016 called Hillbilly Elegy. I see some of you have read it. Thank you. And my friends, it's available wherever bookstores are sold if you haven't got your copy. But, you know, I think one big difference between me and Kamala Harris is that I wrote my book and she copied hers from Wikipedia. And I don't think that we want to make the person who copies her book from Wikipedia the President of the United States. We'd like to make a guy who's already done the job as president and did a very damn good job. And that's Donald J. Trump, and that's our guy for President of the United States. Now, we ought to talk just a little bit, of course, about the economic problems that are caused by Kamala Harris's leadership, because when you've got a vice president who, instead of doing her job, copies from Wikipedia, it leads to some of the problems that we have in our country today. And as much as Kamala Harris pretends that she has nothing to do with the record of Joe Biden, she is the sitting vice president, and we can't let her forget about it. And here is the record of Kamala Harris. The record of Kamala Harris is that Pennsylvanians are spending about $1,000 more per month to afford the same life that they could have afforded when Donald Trump was president. The truth about Kamala Harris's record is that Pennsylvanians are spending more on groceries than they've had the biggest cost increases on groceries than the citizens of nearly any other state or commonwealth in our country. The truth is that residents of Pennsylvania are suffering as much as almost anybody from Kamala Harris's wide open border and the skyrocketing housing costs and the skyrocketing fentanyl overdoses that it has caused. And so our message to Kamala Harris, who tries to pretend that she didn't have anything to do with these policies, is if you really want to help the American people, stop talking about what you're going to do and go and do it. You're the vice president now. Get to work. Stop talking about what you're going to do. So here's the craziest thing to me about this entire campaign is, if you think about it, this hasn't happened in the lifetime of any person living in this country. The last time we had a presidential campaign where you had two records of achievement. You have the record of Donald Trump versus the record of Kamala Harris, and it's staring us all in the face. And that hasn't happened in this country in about 140 years was the last time you had a true repeat election in the United States of America. So just think about this. Donald Trump lowered taxes for working people in the United States of America. Kamala Harris has promised and, in fact, has raised them. Okay? Kamala Harris opened the American southern border and wants to give Medicare and free benefits to illegal aliens. Donald Trump, our message to illegal aliens is pack your bags because in 4 months you're going home. Kamala Harris wants to impose the electric vehicle mandate, which would destroy over 100,000 manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and other places. And Donald Trump wants to empower you to drive whatever in the hell car you want to, because this is America, and we believe people ought to do what they want. Kamala Harris wants to defund the police. She said so herself on camera. Donald Trump wants to back the blue and fight for our law enforcement and safe communities for everybody. And of course, as crazy as this sounds, it is actually true. She actually said it. Kamala Harris wants to use your tax dollars to give sex change surgeries to illegal aliens. And Donald Trump thinks that's crazy, and we ought to build a wall to keep illegal aliens out of our country in the first place. Now, when you ask Kamala what she wants to do, cut out the slogans, Kamala Harris. What are you actually going to do to lower the cost of groceries and housing because they've skyrocketed under your leadership because of your policies. She'll say something like, well, I grew up in a middle-class family. Or you say, Kamala Harris, look, there is a war breaking out on every continent in the world, and we all know that when our leaders screw up and cause the world to set on fire, it's working class and middle class Marines and soldiers who go and pick up the pieces. So we need a president of peace and stability. But you know, when they ask Kamala, what are you going to do to actually bring stability back to the world? Because the world is going crazy right now. She'll say, well, you know, when I was a little kid, I made the hash browns at McDonald's, and I was very proud of it. And anybody with a lick of common sense is listening to this person and recognizing that she has no ability to lead the world's greatest nation. And I think, you know, I'm sure a lot of you agree with us on most of the big policy issues, so this is maybe more to the folks who are watching at home or, you know, we'll see some of the media clips. We got to ask ourselves not just if we agree with the political leaders that we choose on the issues, but whether they've got the basic competence to do the job in the first place. And if Kamala Harris, every time they ask her a question, she can't answer basic details about how she wants to govern this country, then how can we ever trust her in a room with Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping? The answer is we can't. So let's send somebody we can trust. Let's send Donald J. Trump back to the White House. Now, I want to talk about, you know, one of the biggest issues I hear from, not just in Pennsylvania, but all across the country, is we hear a lot about people not being able to afford a home. And, you know, I'm the first person of the millennial generation to ever appear on a national ticket. And I know that a lot of folks in my generation, they're frankly very angry at something that they would like to be able to do that their parents' generation could do, but they can't, which is to afford a nice home on a normal job in their own community. And Donald Trump and I want to rebuild that American dream. We want to make it affordable for our young people to buy a home in the nation that their parents and grandparents built. That's a simple thing that we can get back to if we've got better leadership. But you know, but the media does this thing where they say, well, you know, there's no connection between the border policies and the housing crisis that we have in our country. And I think any of us with a lick of common sense, we're saying, whoa, wait. Here, explain to me this, Kamala Harris. When you let in 25 million illegal aliens into this country, people who shouldn't be here, we got to house them somewhere. And if you're giving 25 million illegal aliens homes that ought by right go to American citizens, then you are making the American dream of homeownership unaffordable for our people. American homes ought to go to American citizens, and that simple principle is something that Donald Trump and I are going to fight for. But we know, of course, it's not just the price of housing that has been made worse by this terrible border crisis. This is an unbelievable and unspeakable human tragedy that has affected thousands and thousands of residents of this state. And let me just tell you a little story. I was in Georgia campaigning a few weeks ago, and they were showing me all the things. I was with the sheriffs, and they were showing me all the things that they had picked up from the Mexican drug cartels who are trafficking drugs, and frankly also a lot of illegal guns into their communities. One of the biggest drivers of illegal gun crime in this country is the Mexican drug cartels. I didn't know that until recently, but it's true. So I'm talking to these sheriffs, and you know, you've got everything behind me and in front of me and in front of the table. You've got, you know, a library shelves of marijuana, you've got cocaine, you've got meth, you've got pills, you've got, you know, sort of more refined THC, and then you've got fentanyl, of course. And there's one thing that looks really out of place, and I say, well, what is that, Sheriff? And he says, I say, that's candy. That looks like a big box of candy is what it looked like, Nerds candy. And I think there was like a box of Sour Patch candy. And I said, Sheriff, what's going on there? And he said, that's not candy, that's drugs. Because the Mexican drug cartels have figured out that if they disguise this candy disguise these drugs as candy, it's going to make it easier to get into our country and easier to disperse it all over our communities. And every single one of us knows what's going to happen, that a little kid is going to open up a packet of candy on an American playground, and he's going to pay for it with his life. And when we talk about securing the southern border, the Democrats talk a whole big game about compassion. Well, compassion starts for American leaders with American citizens and the safety of their children. Compassion, my friends, compassion starts with securing the southern border and not letting this poison into our communities in the first place. Compassion starts with giving American citizens who are caught up in this terrible problem of addiction the opportunity to have a second chance before they take something laced with fentanyl and it destroys their life. Our message to Kamala Harris is that we want our leaders to be compassionate, and we are a compassionate people. But the American president owes his compassion first and foremost to the American citizens who built this great country, not to people who don't have the legal right to be here in the first place. So we have now 13,000 illegal immigrant murderers in the United States of America. And the media all fact check and say, well, some of them are prison. And my response is, all of them ought to be in prison, or by the way, not in this country to begin with. We've got 16,000 rapists and 425,000 convicted criminals, illegal aliens in the United States of America thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. That is more than twice the size of the United States Marine Corps. Think about that. That is what has been welcomed into this country, not just welcomed, not just encouraged, but rewarded sometimes with benefits that are paid for by American taxpayers. Now, one of the biggest lies of the Kamala Harris campaign is that we want to do, meaning Republicans want to go after Social Security and Medicare. Well, Donald Trump has been the president who has protected Social Security and Medicare, and he's going to do it again. But you know the way to destroy Social Security and Medicare is to give these benefits to illegal aliens. And that is exactly what Kamala Harris is proposing to do. So if you're a senior, or you're just a person who thinks that we shouldn't throw our elderly folks into poverty, then join the Trump campaign, send the illegal aliens home before they bankrupt the programs that our people rely on. Now, just a couple more thoughts on this. This is just in Pennsylvania. There are 251,000 illegal aliens in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's unbelievable. And here's another crazy statistic. 72,000 students in Pennsylvania schools are the children of illegal immigrants in this country. Now, think about this. How can you possibly expect to give Pennsylvania children the education they deserve if 72,000 people in their schools, a lot of them don't even speak the local language? That's going to stress our school system, and we know that it already is. So whether you're a public school teacher, a private school teacher, whether you're a parent of a student, or just a person who believes Pennsylvanians deserve a high-quality education, whether they're rich or poor, we have got to get control of this border, and that is exactly what Donald Trump promises to do. Now, I want to make just a couple final points, and then we'll take some questions from the reporters. But one thing that really is really disgraceful that Kamala Harris's campaign does, and I want to say this, whether you're voting for us or not, and I would sure as hell hope that all of you are voting for me and Donald Trump for president. But we know, some people watching at home, we got a lot of cameras here, might be still making up their mind. I want to say something because I think that, in fact, I feel very confident that we're going to make Donald Trump the next president, my friends. I really do. Things are going good right now. But, to the folks watching at home, I want you to know that we care about the First Amendment in this country. And I want to bring it back to the illegal immigration issue because, look, what Kamala Harris, one of the biggest differences here is that Donald Trump, even if he disagrees with you, he will fight for your right to speak your mind and think what you want to think in the United States of America. That is the First Amendment. There's a reason the founders put it first. But if you look at Kamala Harris and you look at the way her surrogates and her campaign have responded to this illegal immigration problem, you realize that their solution to the illegal immigration problem in the United States of America, their solution to the economic crisis that's making groceries and housing unaffordable, it's not to deal with the problems and it's not to listen to the citizens, it is to silence people. It is to prevent them from speaking their mind, and that is our most fundamental right, is to speak our mind about what's going on in this country. And you hear this in a number of different ways. You know, if you talk about, well, I want to pursue an economic policy, and I don't know if you saw this interview President Trump did yesterday. It's one of his best interviews. Seriously, go home and watch it. It's worth watching, because he goes into the lion's den and he's talking to the leader of this very, very liberal, very globally focused magazine. And they're criticizing him for wanting to impose tariffs to protect American manufacturing and to bring some American manufacturing back into our country. Now, to me, it's a very simple equation. Look, if the Chinese are going to use slave labor to make all their stuff, and we want to pay Americans a good middle-class wage to make our stuff, we're going to have to levy a penalty. The people who want to use slave labor and then bring that crap into our country, no, you're going to pay a big fat tariff before you bring it back into our country. That is what we need to do. But, you know, this guy trots out and says, well, this person with this degree and this person with this credential says that this is not a good economic policy. And Donald Trump said, I don't care what they say, because one, they've been wrong for 25 years, and they have. And two, I was already president. I already did it. Judge the results for yourself. And I think most Americans would say the first Trump presidency was peace and prosperity. We'd like to get back to that. But think about this. When they say, well, you know, this person with a fancy degree, or this person with a great credential, and I'm not against education, by the way. I'm an educated man. I'm sure there are a lot of educated people in this room. But it's one thing to use your education to learn, and it's another thing to use your education as a weapon to tell your fellow citizens to be silent about the problems in their own country. And that's a big, big difference. And so when they say, oh, no, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, or you shouldn't dare support Trump's economic policies because this person said it's wrong, you can point and say, I can judge by my own eyes, and Donald Trump's presidency was a success for me and my family, and that's what matters. And they do it. And to me, the grossest way that they do it is on this question of immigration, because they say that if you believe in having a border in this country, and Kamala Harris, her campaign, her surrogates, even Governor Walz, the poor guy, think about it. Y'all, I feel bad for him. Look, I have got the easiest job in American politics. I just have to defend the record of Donald J. Trump. Think about this. I just got to say, look, Tim Walz has to pretend the last 3.5 years of American history didn't happen. That's a tough job. He's got to defend the policies of Kamala Harris. That is a tough job. I don't envy him the task. But all these guys will go out there and they'll say, well, you know, if you don't support illegal immigration, you're not compassionate. Or even if you dare to criticize Kamala Harris's open border, they'll say you're a racist or you're a xenophobe. You've all seen that. Well, here's our message to Kamala Harris. You should stop talking to your fellow citizens like they're subjects instead of your equals. Our message to Kamala Harris is stop trying to silence us for noticing that you're doing a damn terrible job. And our message to Kamala Harris is there is nothing racist about loving your country and securing your border, and it's disgraceful for you to call us names instead of doing your friggin' job. Go do your job, Kamala Harris. Stop calling us bad people. I almost said the other F word. I would have gotten in trouble for that, so I'm okay. I'm okay. All right. One final point, and then we'll take some questions from reporters here. We are going to win this race, but only if, and this is a big if, we vote. And I want to make sure I get this website right, so I'm bringing up my notes here. There's a website that lets you check your registration. It lets you check your polling location. It lets you make sure your registration is updated. And I'd encourage you to go for it. Go to it. It's called swampthevoteusa.com. I'm going to make a few requests, and that's the first one, swampthevoteusa.com. Now, that is the website that is going to help us get our voters out to the polls. Because this election is tight, my friends. I think we're going to win, but in Pennsylvania and a few other states, it's really tight. And we have to get so many votes that whatever crap the Democrats pull, we are going to overwhelm their BS, and we're going to make Donald Trump the next president of the United States. And I think, by the way, look, I know a lot of folks are frustrated by what happened in 2020. Trust me, I'm frustrated. But we have done more, the RNC has done more on election integrity in the past 3 months than the Republican Party had done in the last 3 years. It's a record to be proud of. And I won't tell you that everything is perfect, but I will tell you we're doing a lot better now than we were 4 years ago. So make sure you get out there and make your voices heard. And don't look, I am the biggest critic of election season in the world. But it is what it is. And if they're going to have a 30-day election season, then Republicans need to take as much advantage of it as Democrats, and that includes all the independents and Democrats who are going to vote for Donald J. Trump. So get out there, do the early voting, do the absentee voting, vote however makes the most sense for you, but trust me, there's a whole scientific data obsession behind this, that if we bank enough votes by election day, Donald Trump is the next president, and if we don't, Kamala Harris is. So save us all from that nightmare and get out there, make your voices heard. And here's two more things I'm going to ask you. Third, I want you to get out there, and I want you to vote not just once, but I want you to vote 10 times. Now, I know I got some laughs, but I got some people thinking, well, we're Republicans. We only vote once. We do things the old-fashioned way. Well, here's the way to vote 10 times the legal way. Take yourself to the polls and get 9 other people to go along with you. Because I know, look, I know that every single person in this room, including me, know a lot of people who would vote for Donald Trump, but only if they actually showed up. And so we've got to do the hard work necessary to make sure they show up. And look, we know these folks. They don't pay that close attention to politics, but they're good people. They take care of their families. They do a good job at work. Let's just make sure they get out there and vote. And here's the final thing I want to ask you before we take some questions. Every single one of us has a voice. And whether we're on social media or whatever social media platform that we're on, whether it's just sending text messages, sending emails, or making phone calls, we all have the ability to be what I'll call a force multiplier for the Trump campaign. And here's what I'd like you to do. Whether it's right now or whether it's when I'm taking questions from the reporters, take out your phones, take a photo, post it on social media, and say why you're voting for Donald J. Trump for president. Because think about this. We've got, I don't know, it looks like over 1,000 people in this room. That's a guess. But if every single person reaches 100 people, that's 100,000 people. That's 100,000 people that we can cut through the BS and we can cut through the dishonesty of the press, and we can just get the message that we're going to make this country great again. And I really do believe that after 3 years of the Kamala Harris failure, Pennsylvania is going to make Donald Trump the next president, and we're going to unleash a golden age of prosperity in this country. And it's up to us. If you want higher inflation, more chaos, and more open borders, well, Kamala Harris is your gal. But if you want a golden age of American prosperity, if you want affordable housing and groceries, a peaceful world, and a secure southern border, let's get out there and make Donald J. Trump our next president. God bless you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Remember, so grateful for the warm reception. I'm not getting out of here just yet. We'll take some questions from the reporters. And what I'd ask here is that we start out with folks who are local. I think we have a little time here, so I'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly have. But let's start with a few local reporters.
Hey there, Senator. Peter Zampa, Gray Television. First, a couple of days ago, former President Trump suggested that if necessary, the military step in and handle what he calls the enemy from within on Election Day. What exactly does that mean?
Yes.
And then second, if I could.
Go ahead.
Oh, you can answer that one first if you like.
Yeah, let me answer that question and ask your second question. So first of all, and this is not meant to be a criticism of you. It's meant to be a criticism of the media writ large. Is the media likes to hang their hat on something that Donald Trump said. They take it out of context, and instead of focusing on the fact that gas prices are 45% higher than when Kamala Harris was president, over the last 3.5 years of Kamala Harris's leadership, or that groceries are 25% higher thanks to Kamala Harris's leadership, or that housing prices in Pennsylvania are about 50% higher. They focus on these things instead of on the issues that the American people actually care about. And I think we can do so much better by talking about the issues and the substance. But I want to answer your question. Here's what Donald Trump was saying. We all saw this. We all saw this in the summer of 2020, and I believe that the number is $13 billion of damage, and 20 lives were lost, most of them police officers, in the rioting that happened in the summer of 2020. We have various far-left activists who are talking about civil unrest in this country if Donald Trump were to be elected president again. If you have people who are rioting in American streets, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, whatever their political persuasion is, we're not going to let that happen. We believe in law and order in this country. That's what Donald Trump is talking about, and I think it's very simple. Second question.
And the second question, what message do you think it sends to independent voters when you do not directly answer the question, did Donald Trump lose in 2020?
Sir, look. First of all, on the election of 2020, I've answered this question directly a million times. No. I think there are serious problems in 2020. So did Donald Trump lose the election? Not by the words that I would use. Okay? So look, we could, but look, I really couldn't care less if you agree or disagree with me on this issue. And here's the thing that I focus on, because what the media will do, they'll focus on the court cases or they'll focus on some crazy conspiracy theory. What I know, what verifiably I know happened, is that in 2020, large technology companies censored Americans from talking about things like the Hunter Biden laptop story, and that had a major, major consequence on the election. Now, let's take that as a baseline reality. Even the journalists who constantly fact-check me admit that that's real. Well, okay. You could say, well, let's say your view is that happened and we still think Trump lost, or that happened and we think that means Trump won. Who cares? It happened. Censorship is bad, and that's the substance of what we're focused on, and that's what we care the most about. And here's the final point that I'll make is, you know what I care a lot more about than what happened 3.5 years ago? Is what Kamala Harris has done over the last 3.5 years and what she's going to do if the American people give her 4 years in office. It's a disaster. We know that it has led to terrible, terrible consequences for the American people, and that's what we're focused on. And, you know, one final observation here. I've been asked just in the past 2 weeks, I think I've been asked probably 8 or 9 questions about 2020. And I give an honest answer because I think it's important to ask the question or to answer the questions that are asked. But how many questions have I been asked about why Pennsylvanians can't afford gasoline? I've been asked Thank you. I've been asked very, very few questions about why Pennsylvanians can't afford food and can't afford housing. And here's the simple reality is we can agree to disagree on a whole host of issues, but our message to Pennsylvania independents, to Pennsylvania Republicans, and to Pennsylvania Democrats is very simple. If you want a secure southern border and you want to be able to afford the American dream again, Donald Trump and I have a plan for you, and we will fight for you, and that's our message to voters down the stretch.
Hi, Senator. Jake Sarwar from Fox 56 Wolf. Just wanted to know how the Trump-Vance administration would plan to improve the education system, including keeping necessary leadership activities like Future Farmers or even
Sure.
FBLA, the Future Business Leaders of America.
Yeah. And what's the second question? Did you have a second question?
I do. It's unrelated to education.
Okay, fine. Okay, yeah, I'll answer this question. Look, it's first of all, we're motivated by the simple principle that every child, rich or poor, deserves to have a high-quality education in the United States of America, and we are failing our kids right now. We're failing our kids in a big way. Now, we're failing our kids in a couple of important ways. Number one, we've got a lot of taxpayers coming from the a lot of tax money coming from the Department of Education that is funding radical curriculums instead of funding the curriculums that are going to teach our kids how to read, how to write, and how to do arithmetic. We got to get back to common sense education. The second very basic principle is that we believe that every Pennsylvania child, and especially their parents, ought to be able to decide, to choose for themselves where those kids go to school. So we believe in school choice. And we believe that if we empower parents more with more choices, that's how you best preserve those programs for kids, because they matter. They teach character. They teach virtue. They teach the skills that are necessary for a life of success and of happiness. That's why they exist in the first place. And I think the reason why a lot of them are under stress is because we've got Department of Education bureaucrats instead of parents making the right decisions for their kids. We're going to change that. And I know you had another question.
So Pennsylvania, specifically here in North Central and even in Northeastern, has an abundant resources and manufacturing plants.
Sure.
How in a Trump and Vance administration would you really, try to enhance that role that they play in the communities?
Yeah, very, very, very important question. Well, we are sitting, and I imagine you all know this better than I do, we are sitting on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas right here in the state of Pennsylvania. It's an amazing resource. And again, the contrast between these two candidates and these two visions could not be different. Kamala Harris wants us to buy oil and gas from tin-pot dictators all over the world. Donald Trump wants us to buy it from our own people, our own workers, and our own territory. Drill, baby, drill. That is the way to achieve energy independence. But the energy, so two ways you got to protect manufacturing. First connects to energy, so let me address that. We all know that one of the biggest drivers of costs for our manufacturers is energy, right? If you're manufacturing steel, you use a lot of natural gas because you can only manufacture steel at really high temperatures. That's true for almost any manufactured product. So if we unleash Pennsylvania energy workers and we lower the costs of energy, I believe this is why we talk about a golden age of prosperity. We're going to have a manufacturing renaissance, the likes of which this country has not seen in 150 years. We're going to rebuild the greatest industrial power in the world, and we're going to start with Pennsylvania energy as the foundation. But the final point, just to echo something I said earlier, is it goes back to tariffs, because if you've got foreign countries using slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers, you've got to make those countries pay a big fat penalty, and that's all a tariff is. That's a big part of it, too. Next question.
Hi, Senator. My name is Sabrina Barner. I'm with the Standard Journal in Milton. A lot of people might see the state of this country as hopeless or nearly hopeless. So what would be your words to them, especially to young people who feel like they have no chance at the American dream?
Well, I appreciate that question, Sabrina. And look, I frankly know how a lot of those kids felt, because I grew up in a pretty rough family, and we didn't always have a whole lot of money. And I remember there were times where I looked to the future and wondered whether things were ever going to get better than they were, when I was a teenager, when I was growing up and living with my grandmother who was struggling. in very big ways. And I think that my message to them, most importantly, is don't give up on yourself. One of the things that I've come to appreciate is that, yeah, while sometimes we had it awfully rough and sometimes we were pretty poor, that in a lot of ways it gave me a perspective on the world that I wouldn't have had if I'd been born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And so I think that we take, in this country, we take the good with the bad, and I think in some ways it can be a blessing to have to persevere through very tough circumstances. And I encourage people who feel like the American dream is out of reach, persevere, never give up on yourself. That's the first thing I'll say. But the second thing that I'll say is that while we got a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who can't afford to pay off their credit cards, who are struggling and worrying about the future, don't give up on yourself. But my job as your next vice president is to make it just a little bit easier for you to work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead in this country that all of us love. And I know there are a lot of people out there who feel like the American dream is unaffordable. I talk to a lot of young families, young couples who'd like to buy a home and start a family, have a baby, and they feel like they can't because things are too expensive. One of the things that I promise is that when Donald Trump is in the White House, we will fight every single day for you. We'll fight to make the American dream more affordable, and we will rebuild the greatest engine of prosperity the world has ever seen. We've got to get better leadership in there, so go and vote for Trump. That's the final thing I'll say. Go and vote for Trump by November 5th. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Senator Vance. My name is Arjun Singh with the Epoch Times. Across Pennsylvania, Vice President Harris has been talking a lot about abortion rights, an issue that you and President Trump believe should be left to the states to decide.
Sure.
But that question is different from what you think the states should do once it's in their hands and what you believe is morally right or not. Here in Pennsylvania, it's possible to get an abortion up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, which is about the same as it was under Roe versus Wade. Do you think that law is moral or not, and why?
Well, Arjun, look, I think that even whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, we should all be able to say that aborting a late-term baby for no reason, sometimes it's necessary because of the health of the mother, the life of the mother, but aborting a late-term baby is not something that we should take lightly in this country. And I don't like that. I really do not like that. And I think it's important to say. Now, Arjun, I, of course, come at this from a different perspective from Kamala Harris and a lot of Democrats. I want us to protect every vulnerable life in this country, and I think that's really important. But the reason why, think about this. The way that we do that is we ensure that each state is able to make its policy the way that it thinks it should. So I'm not going to tell Pennsylvanians what they should do in the same way I'm not going to tell Californians and I'm not going to tell Alabamans exactly what they should do. I think it's important to realize the real contrast between this is that Kamala Harris wants to renationalize this issue. She wants taxpayer-funded abortion at the 9th month, and which is disgusting. Donald Trump wants to preserve the right of the states to make these decisions. He, in other words, wants to preserve the right of voters to make these decisions, and that's a big difference between him and Kamala Harris. Next question.
JD, the question is about health care.
Yes, sir.
Trump care never hit the ground running, and we'd like to hear what your policy would be on health care. Because we're one family away from a really big bill, one bad medical incident.
And look, our message to Pennsylvania families is that President Trump is going to have your back. And he did have Pennsylvania families back during the first Trump administration, because a lot of folks don't remember this, but President Trump inherited, and I'm talking about the private health care exchanges, those exchanges were in a bit of a death spiral because the health care that was offered was so bad that people wouldn't sign up until they got very sick. And that's a terrible way to actually run a health insurance program, and that's what we were doing in this country. And Donald Trump implemented a number of reforms to make health care more stable in this country. And I'm not going to say that we fixed everything, because there's still a lot to do. But the guiding principle of Donald Trump's health care plan is, number one, we want people to be able to choose a health care plan that makes sense for their family. Number two, we want them to be able to choose a doctor and keep their doctor, not have their health insurance plan strip their doctor from them. And number 3 is we want transparency in the prices that people are paying. There's no service in the world where you go in and you have no idea what you're actually buying or how much you're actually buying it for. And we think that's one of the main reasons that healthcare is broken. And by the way, this looks or presents very different problems depending on the issue that we're talking about. Okay, so let me give you an example. You go into a hospital, you have a young family, and I've heard this story so many times. The young family has a baby, and they're right at the moment where the woman needs pain medication, and then they choose an out-of-network provider. And they get home, they got a $20,000 surprise medical bill. We got to cut that crap out. We got to stop that. Make sure that people know what they're buying, know what they're paying for. That's really important. But then let me give you another illustration of this problem. You all would probably be shocked to know, or maybe you wouldn't, that Europe pays lower prices for drugs that were invented in this country than Americans do. Well, that's unfair, and that's ridiculous, and Donald Trump's going to change it. In fact, he fought to change it his first 4 years, and then Biden and Harris undid all of his important work. People don't give Trump enough credit for this, but towards the end of his administration, he really took on Big Pharma so that Americans would pay lower costs for prescription drugs. He wants Europeans, in the same way that Europeans have to pay more for their own defense, they've also got to pay a little bit more for their own health care and stop freeloading off the United States of America. That'll lower costs for Pennsylvanians, and that's an important thing we got to do too. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Dave Kennedy from the Williamsport Sun-Gazette. What would you like to do specifically to get people, young people, the opportunity to go to trade schools more, not necessarily
yes, sir.
4-year academic, but we need welders, we need all that kind of folks as well.
Yes, we do.
What specifically would you do? And I do have another question.
Yeah. Look, man, I was raised by a union welder in Armco Steel in Middletown, Ohio, and trust me, he was a hell of a lot smarter than almost any person I've ever met. And it's tough work, but it's not just work with the hands, it's also work with the mind. And I think one thing is leaders got to do a better job of talking about this stuff. We've had a generation of young people, and I was taught this message. I'm 40 years old. When I was going to high school in the 90s, there was this idea that there was work with your hands and there was work with your head, and they were somehow totally different. Talk to a union pipe fitter who can do trigonometry better than a mathematics professor. Work with your hands and work with your head is often the same kind of work, right? And that's an important thing to remember. We got to get more people in the trades, but we got to be honest, the financial support for people who want to go to trade school is just not there in the same way that everybody who wants to go get a 4-year degree. And I happen to think that if you want to go and become an electrician or a pipe fitter or a welder, or you want to work in carpentry, you ought to be able to get the same benefits as somebody who goes to a 4-year college. We got to be equal across everybody. And sir, that comes when things like Pell Grants. You can't get Pell Grants if you want to go to trade school. That's 529 accounts. You can't really use those for trade school. We've got to just give everybody the opportunity to choose the life that they want. And then at the same time, leaders have got to talk a lot more about the fact that there is honorable, great, smart work in the trades. And we got to do a better job of communicating that message as leaders of this country. Next question, sir.
Kind of going along with those ideas about Made in America. There are a lot of people concerned about the cost of tariffs being passed along to U.S. consumers because, as we both know, tariffs are paid at the U.S. ports, not by countries, but by companies when goods are imported into the U.S. How do you all plan to address that?
Yes, sir. So I understand the question, but I think I disagree with the premise in this way, that the assumption that tariffs always lead to price increases for consumers ignores that companies only pay the tariffs if they decide to manufacture overseas in the first place. And this was, Trump, I mentioned that, I mentioned the president, made this argument or did this great interview yesterday. And again, I'd encourage you all to watch it. But this guy's interviewing kind of asked the same question that you just asked, sir. And he says, "Well, these tariffs, these companies are going to pay all these tariffs." And Trump said, "No, they're not. And the guy kind of looks at him kind of confused, and Trump says they're not going to pay anything so long as they make it in America. And that's the whole point of a tariff in the first place, is to make more things in America. But I think we really ignore the costs, the long-term costs, and sometimes the short-term costs of letting other countries make all of our critical stuff. And sometimes it's hard to put a dollar value on this stuff, and sometimes it's really easy to put a dollar value on this stuff. Because remember, at the height of the COVID pandemic, when we were trying to get hospital gowns and masks, and I'm not talking about masks for 3 years old, I'm talking about masks in hospitals for doctors to use when they're doing surgery, and we couldn't get that stuff because the Chinese and other countries made it. So everybody said, well, if you just let the Chinese make everything, it's going to lead to cheaper and cheaper goods. Well, the Chinese are making more of our stuff today than they ever have, and frankly, things are more expensive than they should be. That's a fault of Kamala Harris's leadership and a generation of failed leadership in this country. Donald Trump is going to change it. We're going to make more of our own stuff, and we're going to actually get better prices for consumers in the process. What? Why don't we take just 2 more questions here?
Yeah, Senator Torian with CBS News. After just saying that you do not believe Donald Trump lost in 2020, what would you need to see in November to give you the assurance that it's a secure and safe election?
Well, Torian, look, I'm not worried about it. Because, again, I think that we've done a lot of work here in 2024 to make our elections, to make sure that every legal ballot is cast and every legal ballot is counted. I think, number 2, you don't have technology companies interfering in the election in the same way they were in 2020, though they still are a little bit. And I think that's a problem, Torian. And so to me, the fundamental question is not what do I need to see. The fundamental question is, let's agree, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, we are done with censorship in this country. We're going to protect everybody's First Amendment right to speak. And if we do that, you'll give way more credibility to the 2024 election than anything that I can stand up here and say in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. We'll do one more question.
Thank you for doing this. My name's Hannah. I'm with ABC. My question for you is, are you concerned about election misinformation and the impact it could have on the cycle and turnout? And if no,
Yeah.
why not?
Oh, look, Hannah, that's a good question. Yes, I am worried about it. In fact, I talk to people every now and then who will come up to me and say, well, you know, there are too many problems out there. We don't trust the people who are going to count our ballots, and so I'm not going to get out there and vote. That's the exact opposite attitude you should be taking. If you're worried about what's going on in this country, get out there and vote, but then do more than that. Go volunteer to be a poll worker. Go volunteer to knock on doors. Go volunteer to participate in this democratic process, because if you don't, there's nobody coming to save us. It's all up to us to save this country, the people in this room. And here's something else that I think people don't realize is if you're a local voter in a place like Williamsport, the people who are counting your ballots are often your neighbors. And again, it's the local elections, and especially in our small and rural areas, it's your neighbors who are counting these votes. It's your neighbors who are counting these ballots, and I think that we got to focus on the real problem. The real problem is 2 weeks ago, Democrats killed a bill that would have made it harder for illegal aliens to vote. Right? That's out there in the open. So we got to be, of course, vigilant about that, but we got to make sure that we pass the laws to ensure that every legal ballot, but only the legal ballots count. And the second thing that we got to do is look, we all know what happened. 2020 was the censorship election. They silenced stories and then bragged about it that we know had a big effect on the election. I think that the solution to censorship is for us to get out there and speak our mind and speak it loudly. Don't be afraid. Don't let them silence you. And that's how we defeat censorship in this country. So, look, I want to just leave you with one final thought here, because that was our last question. So, as I mentioned, my wife and my son are running around here somewhere, and I will tell you that one of the coolest things about this, meaning running for vice president, is I get to see this country through the eyes and through the perspective of my family. And especially for a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, those are our 3 kids, you see America with a totally fresh set of eyes, and that's an incredible blessing and a very, very amazing thing. And you know, we got off the plane, and I don't know, you know, the airport's probably about 15 minutes from here. I don't think I've ever been to this airport, but we look at these mountains as soon as we get off the plane, and they're orange and red and yellow, and all I can think is, my God, what a beautiful part of our country. What a great day to be here in Pennsylvania. But you think of that beauty, and you think of the incredible natural resources that we have, and then most importantly, think of just the people every single day, waking up, building the things that we rely on, serving in our military, keeping our communities safe. We have got the greatest country in the history of the world, but it's only going to stay that way if we fix the broken leadership in Washington. So what I want all of us to do over the next 20 days is do everything that you can. Fire Kamala Harris, send her back to San Francisco, and make Donald Trump the next president of the United States. God bless you guys. Thank you all. I love you, Pennsylvania.
Why don't we liberate these United States? We're the ones who need it worst. Let the rest of the world help us for change, and let's rebuild America first. Our highways and bridges are falling apart. Who's blessed and who has been cursed? There's things to be done